Intel finally released fixes for the new Core Ultra processors, so is the 285K now worth buying? In this video, we are going to find out. My name is Matt, I'm a former rocket scientist, and my goal is to help you make the right component choices and put them together the right way every single time. In the UpcFC series, we've been helping you make the right choice by pitting two components against each other in the PC octagon to see who wins. In this video, our focus will be on the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K and how it compares to the current king of gaming, the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D. In addition to showing you benchmarks across 18 games, I will also outline the recent fixes from Intel and show you how they impact performance. And if you stick around, I'll share with you my pro tips for how to unleash the performance locked inside the 285K, something you will not want to miss. It's really not rocket science, so before the main event gets started, let's jump straight into the recent improvements made by Intel. Intel introduced the Core Ultra 200S series or Arrow Lake desktop processors on October 10th, 2024. Unfortunately, the gaming performance that they showed in their launch presentation was somewhat lackluster. This was rapidly followed by a launch on October 24th that, to put it mildly, did not go well. Most day one reviews highlighted significant problems and showed performance well below what Intel had shown. Shortly after the launch, in what was a somewhat refreshing turn of events, Intel's VP and GM Robert Hallock went on the record with Hot Hardware and stated that Intel had screwed up and promised to rapidly fix the issues and improve performance.
But we've identified a series of issues, multi-factor. They're at the OS level, they're at the BIOS level, and I will say that the performance we saw in reviews, and to be very clear, through no fault of reviewers, was not what we expected, not what we intended. The launch just didn't go as planned.
There were a large number of problems at launch, with increased memory latency, BSODs, and a broken application performance optimizer, all contributing to a significant loss in performance. Post-launch, Intel conducted an investigation and determined that there were 4 distinct issues that were impacting performance. The first was a missing performance and power management or PPM package. The second was the Intel Application Performance Optimizer or APO not functioning correctly. The third was BSODs when attempting to launch game titles utilizing the Easy Anti-Cheat service. And the fourth was select performance settings being misconfigured with the launch BIOS. The good news is that many of these issues were addressed in recent weeks via Windows and motherboard BIOS updates, and Intel is now working on a new range of performance optimizations. The bad news is we'll have to wait a little longer for this new microcode to be released. First, the processor power management or PPM package in Windows was not fully optimized for the new Core Ultra 200S processors due to Intel releasing an update to coincide with retail availability of the products, leaving reviewers with generic PPM profiles in their systems. According to Intel, missing, incomplete, or malfunctioning PPM can affect CPU frequency, core parking, C-state latency, and memory latency, and they estimated that this issue impacted performance anywhere from 6 to 30% in the day one reviews. Furthermore, Intel's Application Performance Optimizer, a software-level feature that ensures demanding tasks are sent to high-performing cores on a CPU, was not functioning correctly. That means that game threads were likely sent to lower-power E cores instead of being prioritized and sent to higher-performing P cores. This issue was fixed in later Windows 11 builds, which, according to Intel, could add up to 14% more performance in supported games. This confirms what I found in my 265K review and shows why you shouldn't trust content creators that blindly used APO in their day one reviews. And finally, Intel worked with Epic Games to distribute an updated anti-cheat driver to fix a blue screen when attempting to launch games using anti-cheat software. They also worked with motherboard manufacturers to fix default BIOS settings to optimally configure options such as resizable bar, compute tile ring frequency, memory gear ratio, and power limits. Intel estimates that these BIOS changes will result in a 2 to 14% improvement in performance depending on the application or BIOS setting responsible. To see the impact of these changes on performance, I decided to retest my Core Ultra 7 265K in 5 popular titles: Total War Warhammer III, Cyberpunk 2077, Microsoft Flight Simulator, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, and Black Myth Wukong. For the Gigabyte Z890 Aorus Master that I used to test the 265K, I compared the new BIOS F10i against the old BIOS F10e, and I updated Windows 11 to the latest version. As you can see from the results for Total War Warhammer 3, there was a small increase in performance. For Cyberpunk 2077, the increase in 1% lows was good, but the average FPS didn't change. However, for Microsoft Flight Simulator, the 1% lows increased by a whopping 72%, which is crazy. I retested this game multiple times and got the same result, so this appears to be genuine and a very welcome improvement. For Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, the 1% lows increased by around 9%, with a small reduction in average FPS. And in Black Myth Wukong, the 1% lows actually decreased by around 10%, which is definitely not good. As you can see, the performance impact was not consistent, which is somewhat difficult to explain, so hopefully future firmware updates will fix this. Intel identified a number of new microcode optimizations that will further enhance performance, claiming single-digit increases across 35 games. These performance enhancements will be enabled by a new firmware that is currently undergoing validation prior to customer release, with release anticipated in the first half of January 2025. The BIOS versions to watch out for are those that include microcode 0x114. Hopefully these optimizations will finally help resolve the gaming performance issues that have plagued the Core Ultra 200S processors since launch. As mentioned earlier, the battle today is between two top CPUs, with the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K in the blue corner, taking on the current king of gaming, the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D in the red corner. The test systems being used to run the benchmarks are my Intel Arrow Lake and AMD AM5 Open Bench tables with the following components. For the Intel Arrow Lake test platform, for the motherboard we have an MSI Meg Z890 Unify X. For the RAM, we have G-Skill Trident Z5 CK 48GB of DDR5 9000 at CL42. For the RAM cooler, we have an OLS-I C-RAM dual fan memory cooler. For the GPU, we have an Asus ROG Strix GeForce RTX 4090 OC Edition. For the CPU cooler, we have a Corsair iQ Link H170i RGB 420mm AIO. For storage, we have a 4TB Samsung 990 Pro NVMe Gen 4 M.2 SSD. And for the PSU, we have a Be Quiet Dark Power Pro 12 1200W 80+ titanium power supply. For the AMD AM5 test platform, for the motherboard, we have a Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master. For RAM, we have G-Skill Trident Z5 Neo RGB 32GB of DDR5 8000 at CL38. For the GPU, we have an Asus ROG Strix GeForce RTX 4090 OC Edition. For the CPU cooler, we have an EVGA CLCX 360mm AIO. For storage, we have a 2TB SK Hynix Platinum P41 NVMe Gen 4 M.2 SSD. And for the PSU, we have an Asus ROG Thor 1200W Platinum 2 power supply. Affiliate links for all of these components are listed in the description below. All testing was performed with the RTX 4090 at default clocks. I used Thermal Grizzly graphene cryo sheets for each CPU, and I applied a number of performance enhancing tweaks, which will be covered in detail later in the video. For the 9800X3D, I used a kit of DDR5 8000 CL38 Expo RAM with the primary timings lowered to CL36 48 48 98. I also set the FCLK equal to 2000 MHz so that the clocks are fully synchronized. For the 285K, performance scales with memory speed, so I used a kit of DDR5 9000 CL42 CUDIM RAM in Gear 2, which means the memory controller is running at half the RAM speed. As I explained in my 265K video, the Arrow Lake memory controller is exceptionally good. In fact, it's so good that it's capable of reaching frequencies high enough to start making Gear 4 a viable option. Previously, in almost every scenario, it was best to remain in Gear 2, as the latency hit was so bad that it didn't make up for the gain in bandwidth. With the introduction of Arrow Lake, however, we can achieve similar performance by running DDR5 8600 in Gear 2 or DDR5 9733 in Gear 4, which opens up the possibility for even faster DDR5 memory options in the future. To show just how much of an impact higher speed RAM has on the 285K, I decided to test a kit of DDR5 9000 against a kit of DDR5 7200 in 5 popular titles: Total War Warhammer 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and Black Myth Wukong. As you can see from the results, there was a huge 44% increase in the 1% lows for Total War Warhammer 3, a 6% increase in 1% lows for Cyberpunk 2077, and a 9% increase in the 1% lows for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, which is fantastic. However, for Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Black Myth Wukong, two games that are GPU bound, even at 1080p low settings, the increase in performance was negligible. So when the game loads a CPU, you will see a large increase in the 1% lows, but when the game is heavily GPU bound, you won't, which makes sense. In order to thoroughly test the CPUs, I ran the benchmarks at different game settings, in addition to different resolutions. To place maximum load on each CPU, I tested at 1080p with low settings, which should allow me to extract max performance from each chip. To create a more balanced CPU-GPU load, I tested at 1440p with medium settings. And to see if each CPU had any impact on GPU performance, I tested at 4K with ultra settings. These resolution setting combinations align well with typical gamer selections, with 1440p medium settings reflecting what most online first-person shooter gamers would likely use to achieve maximum frame rates. whereas 4K Ultra settings reflect what most single-player gamers would do with a high-end CPU-GPU combination to extract maximum quality. With the CPUs ready to go, let's check the benchmarks. But before we do, I think it's only appropriate to introduce this the right way. Over to you, Bruce.
And now, it's time! Introducing the components fighting for Blackbird PC Tech benchmark supremacy. In the red corner, we have the champion. In the blue corner, we have the challenger. Who will win this battle royale? Stay tuned to find out.
As you can see from the benchmarks, a 285K performs surprisingly well against a 9800 X3D. So the question that I'm sure many of you are asking is, how do you unlock this performance? As with my previous video on the 265K, there are a few important BIOS tweaks that you will need to make in order to unlock the true potential of the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K. The first is to install a kit of high-speed RAM and turn XMP on. As I explained earlier in the video, the memory controller for Arrow Lake is exceptionally good. For my MSI Meg Z890 Unify X motherboard, which is a 2-DIMM board that is specifically designed for enhanced memory overclocking, I was able to use a kit of DDR5 9000 QDIMM RAM in Gear 2. However, the motherboard that I used to test the 265K, the Gigabyte Z890 Aorus Master, is a 4-DIMM motherboard that wouldn't boot with memory speeds above 8800. So I wouldn't recommend anything above 8800 megatransfers per second for 4-DIMM Z890 motherboards. Since turning on XMP overclocks your memory, there is no guarantee that these speeds will be stable, even with a QDIMM kit, so I strongly encourage you to run a memory stability tool like Kahoo to check. If your system is unstable, you can try increasing the DRAM VDD and VDD-Q voltages by small increments to see if it helps. You may also have to tweak the memory controller voltage as well. In addition to turning XMP on, you should also consider adjusting your memory subtimings. You can watch someone like BuildZoid on actually hardcore overclocking to learn how to do this manually, but most motherboards now come with automatic memory tweaking options that usually do a decent job. In addition, a subtiming tweak that helps boost performance and reduce system latency is to increase the T-Refi to 65535. This will work on most CPUs and is a common tweak used by pros to help extract max performance from a system. After you are done tuning your RAM, I would again highly recommend running a memory testing tool like Kahoo to make sure that your memory is indeed stable. In addition to installing high-speed RAM, you should also consider overclocking your CPU cores. Overclocking your CPU is highly silicon dependent, so the fastest way to determine a good overclock is to use the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility, or XTU. I like this tool because you can rapidly make changes directly in Windows, thereby avoiding having to reboot into BIOS every time you make a change. When you go to the Intel XTU download page, make sure you download version 10.x or later, which supports the new Intel Core Ultra processors. Intel, for some unknown reason, decided to list it second on the download page to make things just a little more confusing. When you first load XTU, you will be presented with the basic view. I would recommend starting with your efficient cores for Arrow Lake CPUs. Based on my testing, I've found that increasing the E-core frequency will give you a relatively large increase in performance. You can use the built-in benchmark to baseline your system, however, I've found it to give somewhat inconsistent results with each run, so if you do plan to use it, I recommend running it 3 times and taking an average. You can then increase the ratio by 1x and rerun the benchmark. You are looking for best performance, not the highest ratio that will run stable. So when you notice that the scores start dropping, then you should go back to the previous ratio, which should be your optimum. For your performance core or P-core ratio, I recommend switching to the advanced view. The reason I recommend doing this is that the ratios are different depending on how many P-cores are active. I recommend tuning the 3 to 8 active core ratio first before tuning the 1 to 2 active core ratio. Again, this is highly silicon dependent and you're looking for max performance and not max frequencies. They will very likely not be the same. Once you find an optimum, I recommend running a more comprehensive tool like Cinebench or AIDA64 to see if your system is stable and how much your performance actually increased. I can't emphasize enough that these tweaks are highly dependent on silicon quality, so it can take some time to tune your system properly. After you find your optimum ratios in XTU, I recommend resetting the tool to default values and entering the new ratios directly in BIOS. For the MSI MEG Z890 Unify X motherboard that I'm using in this video, you can input your E-core ratio on the overclocking page under E-core ratio. For my 285K, I found 49x to be optimum. For the P-cores, you can select turbo ratio next to P-core ratio apply mode so that you can adjust each core. For each of the 8 performance cores, you can enter in the ratios from XTU next to target P-core turbo ratio group X, where X is the core number. For my 285K, I left the first 2 active cores at 57x, but I increased the 3rd to 8th active cores to 55x. As you can see, these are not large frequency overclocks, and my 285K was stable at higher frequencies, but these tweaks provided me with my largest increase in performance, which is what matters most. After you're done tuning your CPU cores, you can go back into XTU, click on Advanced View, and then click on Cache at the top. You can then adjust your processor cache ratio, often called your ring ratio. Once you find an optimum with the built-in benchmark tool, I recommend running a tool like Cinebench or AIDA64 to make sure that your system really is stable. After you find your optimum in XTU, I recommend resetting the cache to the default value and making this change directly in BIOS. For the MSI MEG Z890 Unify X motherboard, you can input your processor cache ratio on the overclocking page under ring ratio. For my 285K, I found that 40x provided the best performance. You should also overclock your NGU or next generation uncore fabric and D2D or die-to-die interface. You can adjust your NGU ratio in XTU by clicking on the other tab and adjusting the SA fabric ratio. However, I would recommend simply adjusting them both directly in BIOS. The NGU default ratio is 26x, while the D2D default is 21x, but I found that you can push them both much higher without impacting system stability. For the MSI MEG Z890 Unify X motherboard, you can input your NGU and D2D on the overclocking page under NGU ratio and CPU D2D ratio. For my 285K, I found that 34x for the NGU and 36x for the D2D provided the best performance. The final tweaks that you should consider making to extract max performance from your Intel Arrow Lake CPU are to change your power profile in BIOS, change your power plan in Windows, and turn memory integrity off. For the MSI MEG Z890 Unify X motherboard, you can click on the overclocking option under MSI Performance Preset and select MSI Extreme Settings. This effectively changes the PL2 from 250 watts to 295 watts and ICC Max from 347 amps to 400 amps while leaving PL1 at 250 watts. This additional boost in power and current help improve system stability at higher frequencies. However, the CPU temps will increase, so keep that in mind if you don't have a good cooling solution. To change your power plan in Windows, open up Control Panel, click on Hardware and Sound, and then click on Power Options. You should select the high performance option to ensure that your CPU cores don't go to sleep while gaming. In addition, you should also consider turning off memory integrity. You can do this by going to Windows Security and selecting Device Security. Under Core Isolation, click on Core Isolation Details and make sure that memory integrity is turned off. At this point, you may be asking, what about Intel APO and undervolting your CPU? Let's start with Intel Application Optimization, or APO, which is a Windows app that optimizes thread scheduling for selected game titles. As mentioned earlier in the video, Intel acknowledged that the APO was not functioning correctly with Core Ultra 200S processors, but that the issue has since been fixed in later versions of Windows. So I decided to try it with Total War Warhammer 3, which is a supported game, but as you can see from the results, it does still not appear to be working properly. Given this data, combined with my prior experience testing APO extensively with my 265K, I decided to not conduct any further testing. It's simply not a tool I can recommend using at this time. With respect to undervolting, I tried using the core voltage offset option in XTU. It requires you to first disable hypervisor in Windows and undervolt protection in BIOS, but unfortunately I found that it had a significant negative impact on system stability. I started to experience issues on my Gigabyte Z890 Aorus Master motherboard after conducting extensive undervolt testing, which is the primary reason why I ended up switching to the MSI Meg Z890 Unify X. So it's not something I would recommend doing for Core Ultra 200S processors. So in summary, the tweaks that I recommend making to extract max performance from your Intel Core Ultra 9 285K are: 1. Install high-speed RAM, turn XMP on and adjust memory sub-timings. 2. Overclock performance and efficient cores. 3. Overclock ring ratio, NGU fabric and D2D interface. And 4. Set power profile in BIOS, set power plan in Windows, and turn memory integrity off. The impact of these tweaks on performance is summarized in this table. I used Cinebench R24 multi-core as the benchmark, and I turned on each tweak individually so I could show its impact on performance, starting with the smallest and ending in the largest. When implemented together, the boost in performance is around 8%, which is significant. As you can see in the table, one of the largest increases in performance came from overclocking the E-cores, which isn't surprising given the increased importance of E-cores now that hyperthreading has been removed. It's also important to point out that many of these tweaks are synergistic, so although they don't appear to have an impact on performance when implemented individually, they do help lower latency, improve performance, and lower temps when implemented together. For the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D, the tweaks that I made are: 1. Turned Expo on, set TREF equal to 65535 and turned high bandwidth support on. 2. Undervolted with a negative all-core curve offset. 3. Increase the PBO limits and set a platform thermal throttle limit. 4. Increase the max CPU boost clock override. And 5. Set power plan to ultimate performance and turn memory integrity off. A comprehensive step-by-step guide for how to implement all of these tweaks is contained in my recent How to Tweak an AMD AM5 Ryzen CPU step-by-step guide video. One important point to re-emphasize is that the performance boost that you're able to achieve will be heavily dependent upon silicon quality. There is no guarantee that your CPU will be stable with all of these tweaks enabled. As I stated earlier, I would highly recommend running a CPU-intensive test like Cinebench or AIDA64 and running a memory stability tool like Kahoo to make sure that your system is actually stable. If at any point you find that your CPU is not stable, then back off on that tweak and retest. In this video, we pitted two top CPUs against each other in the PC octagon to see who will emerge victorious, with the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K in the blue corner taking on the current king of gaming, the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D in the red corner. The round-by-round results show a decisive victory for the 9800X3D, with 10 wins, 4 losses, and 4 draws across 18 hard-fought rounds. When you look at the performance across 17 games, you see that the 285K loses the 1% low battle, especially at lower resolutions and game settings, where games are more heavily CPU-bound. As the games become more GPU-bound, however, it's able to not only match the 9800X3D, but beat it in average FPS by around 5%, which is quite impressive. If we now look at professional workloads such as Blender and 7-zip, the 285K dominates with advantages of over 50%, which is not surprising given the much higher core count. The good news with the new Core Ultra 200S processors is that this performance comes with significant improvements in efficiency, with the 285K able to beat the 9800X3D in 3D Mark time spy, while losing to it in Cinebench by a similar margin. Not too bad given how incredibly inefficient Raptor Lake CPUs were. But what happens when we look at cost? The 285K 285K is currently selling for $599, which is approximately $120 more than the 9800 X3D at the time of filming this video. If you now add the cost of the RAM as well, then the 285K DDR5 9000 combo is around $300 or 46% more expensive than the 9800 X3D DDR5 8000 combo. If you convert that into gaming value or FPS per dollar at 1080p, then the 9800 X3D provides a knockout blow by offering over 60% better value in gaming when compared to the 285K, which is obviously not great for Intel. With that said, these results do offer up some interesting choices. On the one hand, if you're building a new gaming focused system and you want the very best, then based on these results, I would recommend buying a 9800 X3D. If you can find it. It's a truly amazing gaming chip that offers outstanding performance at an equally great price. However, if you do a lot of professional workloads in addition to gaming, and you believe that Intel will indeed improve gaming performance with their next firmware update, then the 285K might be an attractive option. It will unfortunately cost you more, and availability of the 285K is not that much better than the 9800 X3D, but it might finally offer Intel fans a compelling reason to upgrade. I was actually quite impressed with how competitive the 285K was in these tests. The only thing really letting it down is the price, which is something Intel can do something about. Hopefully they can come through with their new firmware update in January, because as things currently stand, AMD is dominating PC gaming. Remember, it's not rocket science, it's Lego. My goal is to help you make the right component choices and put them together the right way every single time. Thank you for watching this video in the Ultimate PC Component Fighting Championship Battle Series. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes as other components battle it out in the PC Octagon. And if you'd like to support the channel further and gain access to some really great perks, please also consider joining our new membership program. Bye for now.